Hello guys, welcome back. In my last episode, I presented how from a small town of Salem, the Jebusites transformed the site into a walled and well-protected fortress of Jebus. We also talked about David's incredible strategy to conquer the city and the establishment of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. We continued the story of Jerusalem in the time of Salomon, who enlarged the city with impressive and unique buildings centered around the temple on Mount Moriah. Finally, we finished with the story of King Hezekiah, who built massive walls to protect the settlements on the western hill, built a new tunnel that channeled water to the pool of Siloam, and thanks to his faithfulness to the God of Israel, Jerusalem was miraculously delivered from the Assyrian destruction in the 8th century BC. Today, we will continue the story and talk about some of the greatest tragedies that Jerusalem experienced, but also about God's faithfulness to prevent the total destruction of His chosen people. But before I will do that, let me invite you to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification button to be informed about new episodes on Israel My Channel. So let's begin our journey in time. It is 9th of the month Tammuz, 586 BC. The greatest destruction has come upon Jerusalem. The kings that succeeded Hezekiah progressively departed from their God to the point that God himself allowed the Babylonian Empire to conquer his chosen people. After a year and a half of Babylonian siege, the city of Jerusalem is destroyed. The great king Nebuchadnezzar decides that the whole city needs to be leveled to the ground. The warnings of the prophets did not save Jerusalem, as her kings chose idolatry over the God of Israel. Is this the end to the nation of Israel and the promises God has given Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? The Temple of Salomon is destroyed, and it seems that the powers of darkness have won. Babylon, which represents the pride of humankind, feels victorious and unstoppable. To comprehend why Israel was exiled from the land for 70 years, we must go back to the Mosaic Covenant, where God gave Israel specific instructions and promises that He will fulfill if they behave correctly. Additionally, God gave Israel special warnings of what will happen if they fail to follow His commandments. And so in the prophetic announcement, God reveals to Jeremiah that the people of Israel would be taken to Babylon and exiled from the land for 70 years. The prophet Daniel continues Jeremiah's revelation, giving us further information. From history, we know that Israel was exiled for 70 years. 605 to 536, first deportation to the reinstitution of sacrificial system, or 586 to 516, temple destruction to the temple rebuilding. In the book of Daniel, we learn that those 70 years are a consequence of Israel's disobedience visible in the Bible. Daniel refers to this as the 7 of the 70 weeks. On Daniel's historical timeline, 1 week represents 7 years of disobedience. Therefore, if Daniel is saying that Israel was disobedient for 70 weeks, Israel was actually rebellious for 490 years. 7 times 70 equals 490 years. In other words, there were 70 sabbatical years for disobedience. Each sabbatical year occurs every 7 years. Therefore, there were 490 years of disobedience, 7 times 70. 490 are years when Israel has disobeyed God's commands in the land. 70 years are required for the land to receive its Sabbath rest, which Israel as a nation did not provide for the land. Nebuchadnezzar began the siege of Jerusalem in December 589 BC. The population of Jerusalem was surrounded for 30 months. It must have been a frightening experience to stand on one of the towers of Jerusalem and see a massive army of Babylon. To prevent any escapes from the city, the Babylon army builds a barrier filled with soldiers who are ordered to kill anyone who attempts to escape. The Bible describes the city as enduring horrible deprivation.
The tongue of the sucking child cleaveth to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The young children ask bread, and no man breaketh it unto them. They that did feed delicately are desolate in the streets. They that were brought up in scarlet embrace dunghills. For the punishment of the iniquity of the daughter of my people is greater than the punishment of the sin of Sodom, that was overthrown as in a moment, and no hand stayed on her.
After completion of the 11th year of Zedekiah's reign, Nebuchadnezzar broke through Jerusalem walls, conquering the city. The king Zedekiah and his followers attempted to escape, but they were captured on the plains of Jericho and taken to Riblah. Zedekiah was blinded, bound, and taken captive to Babylon, where he remained a prisoner until his death. After the fall of Jerusalem, the Babylonian general Nebuzaradan was sent to complete its destruction. Jerusalem was plundered, and Solomon's temple was destroyed. Most of the elite were taken into captivity in Babylon. The city was razed to the ground. Only a few people were permitted to remain and tend to the land. This was a horrible time for the Jewish people and the holy city of Jerusalem. But not all was lost, as the Jewish people still had the promise that the captivity will end after 70 years of punishment will be completed. And as promised by God, after 70 years of exile in Babylon, Persia, the new world power, finally allows the Jews to return. 50,000 Jewish people begin a long journey to the Promised Land. To give you an idea, a straight line from Babylon to Jerusalem is almost 700 miles or 1,100 kilometers by foot. And of course, the Jewish people probably took the major ancient route of the King's Highway that was much longer but safer journey. When the Jewish people finally arrived in Jerusalem, they encountered a city in ruins. What was left was only the devastation done by the Babylonian Empire. Additionally, the Jews were not welcomed in the land promised by God. The foreign nation that settled in the place of the Jewish people were not happy that the Jews returned. Without the protection of the walls, the Jewish people were often attacked and killed as they tried to settle in their homeland. Instead of rebuilding the ancient city, the Jews started taking a more manageable way by settling in the neighboring villages. It was easier to create a new home rather than build one on the ruins. The future of the Jewish people in Jerusalem seemed like a dream that may not come to a realization. But in the royal palace in Susa, Persia, God was preparing a leader that would help the Jewish people rebuild their capital. Nehemiah, whose name means God's comforts, is troubled by the news that his brethren in Jerusalem can't live in peace and their city is in rubble. As an official in the Persian court, Nehemiah risks everything he has and asks the king Artaxerxes I of Persia if he can travel to Jerusalem and rebuild the city. The grace of God is upon Nehemiah because he is granted to take up this mission and is sent with a royal escort to Jerusalem. Additionally, Nehemiah is given documents that allowed him to request materials for rebuilding Jerusalem across the Persian Empire. Thus, Nehemiah becomes the official governor of the Persian province of Judah. One of the first things that Nehemiah does upon arriving in Jerusalem is the inspection of the walls. Under the cover of the night, Nehemiah leaves the city on some kind of animal that is not specified. Perhaps it was a donkey. He goes through the valley gate. Here you can see his path on this 3D model. From the valley gate, he heads towards the dung gate, also called the refuse gate. On his way, he sees that the walls and gates are destroyed by fire. From Dung Gate, he moves towards the Fountain Gate, but because of the rubble, the animal he rides cannot pass through. We read that Nehemiah inspects the rest of the wall and enters the city back through the Valley Gate. After the inspection, the Jews managed to rebuild the sacrificial system in Jerusalem and eventually in 516 BC the temple itself. Although not as glorious as in the days of Salomon, the temple once again stood in Jerusalem where the Jewish people could worship their God once again. But without the walls, Jerusalem was still vulnerable, and all that was rebuilt could once again be destroyed. Therefore, Nehemiah encourages the people of Israel to gather together and begin building Jerusalem's walls. Thus, gate by gate, wall after wall, under the constant threat of an attack, the wall and gates of Jerusalem are rebuilt. On the 25th of the month of Elul in 444 BC, the whole project is completed. It took 41 teams and 52 days to complete the new wall of Jerusalem. Here you can see all the gates that were built in Nehemiah time. But that was not the end of Nehemiah's work in Jerusalem. For the next 12 years, Nehemiah continued to develop Jerusalem. We read that Nehemiah increased the city's population to many thousands. With Ezra as a teacher, he ensured the teaching of the Torah. He fought corruption and injustice. He made sure that the day of Sabbath is respected by the people of Israel. And finally, he promoted the Hebrew language. Still, the province of Judah was a small and insignificant political land subjected to the Persian Empire. And even though many Jews did return from exile to Israel, many remained in the foreign land. Yet far from the land of their forefathers, the Jews continued to create literature that would influence future generations. Once again, I would like to return to the book of Daniel, which provides a great amount of information on future events. The book of Daniel precisely describes many world empires, their development, their fall, and most importantly, Daniel records the culmination of world's history, where God will establish an everlasting kingdom where the Messiah will rule forever. The things that Daniel sees and records are so dramatic that sometimes the prophet is totally exhausted and troubled by the vision he receives from God. In chapter 8 of the book of Daniel, the prophet is given insight into events that will happen in less than 400 years after Daniel's lifetime. The persecutions of a madman named Antiochus IV Epiphanes, who committed great evil and abominations in years 170 to 163 BC. Before we focus on Antiochus, I would like to talk about the context of Daniel's prophecies that are not only important to the Jewish people, but to the entire world. The prophet Daniel lives through two great world empires. First, as a young boy, he was taken captive to Babylon, where he experienced its greatness and collapse. Second, he saw how Persia defeated the mighty Babylonian Empire. During that time, the prophet Daniel was also chosen by God to see events long after his death in the form of dreams and visions. In those visions, symbolically, world empires are represented by different things. What is astonishing is that the symbols used are very accurate in describing the nature of each kingdom and the historical events that occur around it. If you believe that the book of Daniel was truly written by the prophet, then this book is the most spectacular piece of prophecy in human history. Literal critics dismissed that the book was written in Babylon because if that was true, they would have to accept that it is a true miracle. Daniel's timeline begins with the Babylonian Empire represented by a golden head on a statue or a lion with wings. It is followed by Persia, represented by a chest and arms of silver or a bear. The third empire revealed to Daniel is Greece, represented by a belly and thighs of bronze, or a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads. The last world empire mentioned is Rome, characterized by legs of iron and feet of mixed iron and clay, or an unspecified beast with 10 horns. All the empires are midgets compared to the final empire that has a divine nature. This empire comes like a meteor from heaven, crushes the world's empires, grows like a vast mountain, and fills the whole earth, and it is ruled by the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man coming in the clouds. In chapter 8, Daniel gets another vision, a vision of a ram, the goat, and the little horn. In this vision, explained to Daniel by angel Gabriel, we learn that the ram represented the Persian Empire. According to Ammianus Marcellinus from the 4th century AD, the Persian ruler would carry the golden head of a ram when he marched before his army. The ram has 2 horns in the vision. One horn was larger and developed later than the other. The horns would correspond to the fact that Persia consisted of Media and Persia. Persia developed later, joined with Media to create a single empire, and eventually Persia became prominent in that empire. Later in the vision, we read that the goat charges the ram with a prominent horn between his eyes. Again, the angel Gabriel in verse 21 explains that the goat should be identified as the future Greek Empire. The prominent horn can be understood as representing Alexander the Great, who started his campaign against Persia in 334 BC. We read that the goat will come from the west, which corresponds nicely with the position of Greece to Persia. The goat charges the ram with a great rage, which symbolizes the anger of Greeks who never forgot the destruction Persia made to Athens by Darius I in 490 and his son Xerxes I in 480 BC. We read that the prominent horn was broken off at the height of his power. This, of course, is a reference to Alexander the Great, who, after carving out an empire of 1.5 million square miles, died from fever in 323 BC at the age of only 32 years old. Alexander left 2 sons, but they were quickly murdered, and the empire was split into 4 parts, just as the prophecy foretells, speaking of the 4 horns. Out of one of the 4 horns grew a little horn that started small but became very large and powerful. Scholars agree that this little horn represents the 8th ruler of the Seleucid Empire, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, ruling from 175 to 163 BC. We read that this little horn will become a great enemy of the Jewish people.
And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered.
These few verses are a remarkable description of what Antiochus IV Epiphanes did in Jerusalem end to the Jewish people. Antiochus gained his position through bribery and flattery. He made notable conquests in the south, in Egypt, the east, in Persia, Parthia, Armenia, and the beautiful land, meaning Judah. His persecution of the Jewish people started after Antiochus was humiliated in Egypt by Rome. In 168 BC, Antiochus led an attack on Egypt and also sent a fleet to capture Cyprus. Before he reached Alexandria, his path was blocked by a single elderly Roman ambassador named Gaius Pompilius Linnaeus, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate directing Antiochus to withdraw his armies from Egypt and Cyprus or consider himself in a state of war with the Roman Republic. Antiochus said he would discuss it with his council, whereupon the Roman envoy drew a line in the sand around Antiochus and said, "Before you leave this circle, give me a reply that I can take back to the Roman Senate." This implied Rome would declare war if the king stepped out of the circle without committing to leaving Egypt immediately. Weighing his options, Antiochus decided to withdraw. Only then did Pompilius agree to shake hands with him. The angry Syrian king returned to Judah and poured out his anger at the Jewish people who did not want to undergo Hellenization. Antiochus forbade circumcision and Torah study, desecrated the temple in Jerusalem by sacrificing a pig on the altar, dedicated the temple to Zeus, and murdered anyone who did not conform. Some estimate he killed more than 1,000 Jewish people. Despite many advantages that the Jewish people could receive from assimilation with the Greek culture, some hold fast to their Jewish identity and could not abandon their father's faith and God. The culminating point for the Jewish rebellion against Greek culture and dominance in the region was 175 BC. This year, Antiochus IV Epiphanes became the Seleucid Basileus. The title Epiphanes, which he chose, meant manifested from God and gave an understanding of his high esteem of himself. Although, rightly so, he was secretly called by many people Epimanas, meaning madman. Antiochus IV appointed a Greek-loving culture Menelaus as the high priest in Jerusalem, but during his failed campaign in Egypt to subdue the Ptolemaic kingdom, the Jewish people rebelled and replaced Menelaus with Jason as the high priest. Although Jason was not a perfect candidate and could be characterized as a Hellenist, the rebellion compiled with the failed campaign in Egypt angered the Seleucid king, who decided to expose all his frustration on the Jewish people. Epiphanes stormed Jerusalem with his army, slayed Jason's supporters, and reinstituted his puppet Menelaus as high priest in Jerusalem. Antiochus' general Apollonius was left in charge of the city, who brought down the walls surrounding Jerusalem and built a great fortress called Acra on the hill of Ophel, which served as a Greek stronghold in the area. In addition to the appearance of a large fortress that reminded the Jewish people of the Greek dominance in Jerusalem, Epiphanes decided it was time to root out the Jewish identity in Judea. He prohibited Jewish holidays in Jerusalem and did not allow circumcision, and converted the Jewish temple into a Greek worship center for the Greek god Zeus. To humiliate the Jewish people, pigs, the unholy animals for the Jewish people, were sacrificed on the altars. The events were a dark time for the Jewish people, but they also brought a holy zeal that would begin a tremendous transformation. This transformation begins in the town of Modin in Judea, where the Jewish priest Matthias and his 5 sons, one of whom became known as Judah the Maccabee, courageously stood up for the truth. In 167 BC, a Seleucid official arrived in Modin and demanded a sacrifice to the Greek gods. Matthias refused, but quickly someone requested he would replace Matthias in performing the sacrifice. The betrayal did not last long, as Matthias grabbed a knife and killed his countrymen before he could finish the sacrifice. Matthias, joined by his sons and loyal Jews, defeated the Greek officials and his soldiers. This was the beginning of a spectacular Jewish revolt known in history as the Maccabean revolt, which derives from the third son of Matthias, Judah the Maccabeus, a title from an Aramaic word Maccaba, meaning hammer. As time progressed, the Jewish army grew, and Antiochus himself was busy with a constant threat from the Parthian kingdom that threatened the eastern borders of his empire. Such circumstances allowed the guerrilla Jewish army to make significant victories in Wadi Harami, Bet Haroan, Emmaus, and Bet Zur. In 164 BC, the evil ruler Antiochus IV contracted a fatal disease, and his 10-year-old son Antiochus V inherited the empire. The unexpected events require much attention at the Seleucid capital, and therefore the campaign in Judea to subdue the rebellion is abandoned. Jerusalem, the eternal capital of the Jewish people, without its walls, is easily retaken by the Maccabees. The last stand of the forces of the evil Antiochus IV is the infamous fortress Actra built by Epiphanes. Under the leadership of the hammer Judah the Maccabee, the fortress is razed to the ground. The statue to Zeus and all the objects remaining of the pagan worship are destroyed, and the temple is cleansed and can be used once again by the Jewish people. One of Matthias' sons, Jonathan, is ordained as a new high priest of Jerusalem. Once again, the Jewish people could light the menorah in the temple, symbolizing that light is victorious over darkness. However, there was a problem. There was not enough holy oil to keep the menorah light for more than one day. It took several days to prepare new oil for the menorah. But then, a miracle happened. The fire of the menorah kept on going for 8 full days. Each day, the priests of the temple looked at the menorah and praised God that the light was shining, and they could have enough time to prepare the holy oil. Today, this miracle event is symbolized by the Hanukkah, a 9-arm menorah commemorating God's provision for 8 days. And so we arrived to the end of today's episode. This episode was a summary of the episodes I did in the past. I provide more information in the original episodes, so if you did not see them, I am leaving a link to the playlist in the description. In the third episode, we will cover the period from the Greek era to the Roman era, and we'll end at the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, I encourage you to comment. You can also subscribe to this channel to stay informed about the next monthly episodes on Jerusalem's history. If you found the information that I provided helpful, I would kindly ask you to consider supporting my channel by hitting that join button on my main page. This will help me greatly. Have a good day and Shalom.